There is a night in the ancient world that armies still do not fully understand. A camp of nearly 200,000 soldiers, the most feared military machine on the planet. A king with an unbroken record of conquest, standing at the edge of one final city, certain that by morning it would be his. And then morning came, and the camp was silent, not retreated, not defeated in battle. Silent, filled with the dead. The Bible says an angel did it. In a single night, one being walked through the largest army in the region and left behind 185,000 corpses. No battle, no siege engines breached, no recorded combat at all. To understand what happened at the gates of Jerusalem, you first have to understand what the Assyrians were. Because the terror that hangs over this entire story is not exaggeration. It is documented, deliberate, and it was the entire point. The Assyrian Empire, by the 8th century BC, was the most efficient war machine the ancient Near East had ever produced. Iron weapons, standing professional armies, siege technology that could break through walls other empires considered unbreakable. But their real weapon was not iron, it was reputation. Assyrian kings did not merely conquer cities. They documented, in stone, in exhaustive and almost administrative detail, exactly what they did to the people inside them. Flaying, impaling, mass deportation of entire populations, so that the conquered had no homeland left to return to and no army left to raise. This was not incidental cruelty. It was strategy. A city that heard what happened to the last city that resisted was a city far more likely to surrender without a fight. By the time King Sennacherib inherited the Assyrian throne, that machine had already swallowed the northern kingdom of Israel. Samaria had fallen decades earlier. Its population had been deported and scattered, and its territory absorbed into the empire. What remained of the United Kingdom of David and Solomon was a single, small, mountainous territory in the south. Judah at this moment had a king who was doing something politically dangerous. His name was Hezekiah. According to the biblical account, Hezekiah instituted sweeping religious reforms. He removed pagan altars, destroyed objects of idol worship that had crept into Judah's religious life, and rededicated the nation to the worship of YHWH alone. 2 Kings describes him as a king unlike any before him in Judah's history, in the intensity of his devotion. But reform at home was not the only thing Hezekiah did. He also rebelled against Assyria. He stopped paying tribute. And in the political logic of the ancient Near East, refusing to pay tribute to Assyria was not a diplomatic inconvenience. It was an invitation to annihilation. Sennacherib responded exactly the way you would expect an empire like this to respond. He marched an army into Judah, and this is where the biblical narrative and the historical record begin to overlap in a way that very few ancient events allow. Sennacherib's campaign did not go straight for Jerusalem. It went for the fortified cities first. One by one, methodically dismantling Judah's ability to resist before ever reaching the capital. 2 Kings 18 says simply that Sennacherib came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. One of those cities was Lachish, and Lachish is where the investigation stops being purely textual, because Lachish is one of the most extensively documented military engagements in the entire ancient world, documented not just by the Bible, but by the Assyrians themselves. When archaeologists excavated Nineveh, Sennacherib's capital, they uncovered a room in his palace built specifically to commemorate this one siege. Stone relief carvings running the length of an entire wall, depicting the assault on Lachish in extraordinary detail. Siege ramps, battering rams, archers, rows of captives being led away, some impaled outside the city walls as a warning to anyone still resisting. This is not inference. This is not a hypothesis assembled from fragments. Sennacherib chose to make Lachish the centerpiece of his palace's official artwork. He wanted every visitor to his court to see exactly what happened to a city that defied him. And when archaeologists later excavated the site of Lachish itself, in the region now part of modern Israel, they found the destruction layer that matches this campaign. Burned structures, a siege ramp still visible in the archaeological record, one of the oldest siege ramps ever discovered intact. Arrowheads, sling stones, the physical residue of a battle that the Assyrians themselves chose to immortalize in stone. This is important to state precisely. Lachish is confirmed. The siege happened. The destruction happened. This is not a matter of biblical claim standing alone. This is one event where text and archaeology meet almost perfectly. But Lachish was not the final target. Lachish was the demonstration. The message it sent was aimed at one city, Jerusalem. By the time Sennacherib's forces turned toward Jerusalem, Judah had already lost, according to the Assyrian king's own later account, 46 of its fortified cities. Jerusalem stood alone, cut off, surrounded, and then came something almost as unsettling as the army itself. A letter, according to 2 Kings. Sennacherib sent his officials to the walls of Jerusalem, and one of them, the Rabshakeh, a senior Assyrian official, delivered a speech directly to the people on the wall, in their own language, deliberately bypassing the king, so the message would reach the common soldiers and citizens directly. The speech recorded in 2 Kings 18 is a calculated piece of psychological warfare. The Rabshakeh mocks Hezekiah's trust in Egypt as an ally, calling it a broken reed that will pierce the hand of anyone who leans on it. He mocks Hezekiah's trust in YHWH, asking why the people should believe their God can save them, when no god of any other nation Assyria has conquered was able to save its people. And then he makes the claim that turns this from a military threat into, in the biblical framing, a direct theological challenge. He claims that YHWH himself told Sennacherib to destroy this land. The text is explicit that this was intended to terrify and demoralize the population directly, without going through their king. And it worked, at least in terms of fear. The people on the wall stayed silent because Hezekiah had ordered no one to answer. Hezekiah's own response, according to the text, was to tear his clothes, put on sackcloth, the ancient expression of grief and desperation, and go to the temple. And then he did something else. He sent for a prophet. The prophet Isaiah's response, delivered as a message from YHWH, is recorded in both 2 Kings 19 and Isaiah 37 in nearly identical language across both books. Itself a detail worth noting, since it suggests these accounts were drawing on a shared, carefully preserved source rather than independent invention. The message is specific. Sennacherib will not enter this city. He will not shoot an arrow into it. He will not come before it with a shield or build a siege ramp against it. He will return the way he came. This is a bold claim to make about the most powerful army on earth, standing at your gate. Sennacherib, according to the text, then sent a second, even more direct threat. A letter this time, rather than an oral speech, repeating the claim that no God has ever saved a nation from Assyria, and warning Hezekiah not to be deceived into thinking his God would be any different. Hezekiah's response to that letter is one of the more striking moments in the narrative. He takes the letter into the temple and, in the words of the text, spreads it out before YHWH. Not a private prayer, a physical act, laying the threat itself out as evidence, appealing directly to divine intervention. Isaiah's response this time is longer, and it includes a specific prophecy that Sennacherib will hear a rumor, return to his own land, and fall by the sword there, in his own country. Remember that detail. It matters later, and not just theologically, because now we arrive at the night the entire case file is built around. Here is the verse, in its entirety, without embellishment. 2 Kings 19, verse 35. That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. That is the complete biblical account of the event. One sentence describing the act. One sentence describing the discovery. No description of how. No description of what the soldiers experienced, if anything, in the moment. No drawn-out scene. The text is almost clinical in its restraint, which is itself unusual, because so much of the surrounding narrative, the speeches, the letters, the prayers, is rendered in extensive detail. The central event, the mass death of an entire army, is given exactly 2 sentences. Isaiah 37 repeats the account almost word for word. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 21, offers a third version, condensed even further. The Lord sent an angel who annihilated all the fighting men and the leaders and officers in the camp of the Assyrian king. So he withdrew to his own land in disgrace. 3 accounts, same core claim, same restraint in the telling, and then the text moves immediately to the aftermath. Sennacherib breaks camp and returns to Nineveh, and there, according to 2 Kings, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his own sons Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword and escaped to the land of Ararat. Another son, Esarhaddon succeeded him as king. This detail, that Sennacherib was assassinated by his own sons, is not unique to the Bible. It is independently corroborated, which we will come back to. So the sequence the text presents is this: siege, threat, prophecy, mass death in a single night, retreat, and eventually assassination at the hands of his own family, in his own capital, years later. The question the rest of this investigation has to sit with is simple to ask and very difficult to answer. What actually happened in that camp? This is where the case connects to something this series has traced before. The being described here is called, in Hebrew, Malach YHWH, the same title investigated in case file number 1, in the story of the burning bush, in the encounters with Hagar, Abraham, Gideon, and Manoah, the angel of the Lord. In those earlier appearances, the figure spoke, negotiated, made promises, accepted worship-adjacent responses without correction. Here, the being does none of that. There is no dialogue. No appearance is even described. The angel of the Lord in this account is purely an agent of judgment, entering a military camp and departing having accomplished a single devastating task. Scholars and theologians across centuries of interpretation have not agreed on exactly what kind of being this account describes, and it would be dishonest to present this investigation as though a consensus exists. 3 positions recur consistently in the literature. The first, held broadly within much of historic Jewish interpretation, is that the angel of the Lord here is a created being, a member of the heavenly host, functioning as God's agent of judgment, comparable to other instances in the Hebrew Bible where a destroying angel executes divine judgment, such as the final plague in Exodus. The second, held broadly within much of Christian interpretive tradition, including many who apply the same reasoning to the burning bush and the angel's appearances to the patriarchs, treats this being as a manifestation of divine action so direct that the distinction between the angel and God's own activity collapses. Under this reading, the title angel describes the mode of the action rather than a separate created individual. The third position, more common within the same strand of ancient Israelite theology, explored in case file number 1, treats the angel of the Lord who executes judgment as a recurring biblical category, appearing also, for instance, in the story of David's census in 2 Samuel 24, where a destroying angel is sent against Jerusalem and then stopped, a category whose exact ontological status the text itself never fully defines. What can be said with confidence is this: in every case where this title appears in the Hebrew Bible, the text treats the being's actions as functionally identical to a direct act of God, without needing to explain how a created intermediary relates to the one who sent him. Beyond that, the text does not resolve the question, and this investigation will not pretend that it does. A 185,000 men in a single night is a staggering figure, larger than most entire ancient armies, let alone a single night's casualties. Here again, honesty requires acknowledging real scholarly disagreement, rather than resolving it artificially. Some scholars take the number as a literal, precise historical figure, consistent with the way Assyrian campaign records elsewhere describe deportations and casualties in the tens of thousands. Others point to the way large numbers function in some ancient Near Eastern military and administrative texts, sometimes as approximations, sometimes shaped by scribal conventions for rendering very large or symbolically significant totals, and argue the figure may not be intended as a precise headcount in the modern statistical sense. Neither position can be proven from the text alone. What the Bible presents is a specific number, stated 3 times without qualification. What can be said honestly is that ancient numerical conventions are a genuine and ongoing subject of scholarly debate, and this is one of the passages where that debate applies. Here is where this case file becomes unusual, because the empire on the losing side of this story left behind its own written record of the campaign. It is called the Taylor Prism, a hexagonal clay artifact inscribed with Sennacherib's own annals, discovered in the 19th century and now held in the British Museum, with closely related versions also known from other inscriptions. In it, Sennacherib describes his 3rd campaign in detail. He claims to have besieged 46 of Hezekiah's fortified cities and captured them. He describes Hezekiah himself in a now famous phrase, claiming he shut him up like a bird in a cage inside Jerusalem. And then something remarkable happens in the inscription. It stops. Sennacherib, an emperor whose entire propaganda apparatus was built on documenting conquest in exhaustive detail, as we saw at Lachish, never claims to have captured Jerusalem. He never claims to have defeated Hezekiah in battle. He describes the siege, describes the terror, describes the tribute Hezekiah eventually sent him, and the record simply ends there, without the conquest. For a king who commemorated the fall of Lachish with a dedicated wall of stone relief in his own palace, the absence of any claim to have taken Jerusalem is conspicuous. It is, at minimum, the silence of an empire that did not get what it came for. Whatever the precise cause of that failure was, this does not confirm the angel. It does not confirm the number 185,000. What it confirms is the shape of the outcome, a siege that began with total Assyrian confidence and ended without the one thing an ancient Near Eastern king would never have failed to boast about. Had it happened, the assassination of Sennacherib by his own sons, meanwhile, is independently referenced outside the Bible as well. The Babylonian Chronicle records his death, and later classical sources, including the Greek historian Berossus, as preserved through later writers, describe him being killed by one of his own sons. The precise family details vary slightly between sources, which is common for ancient succession accounts, but the core event, an Assyrian king assassinated by his own son, is not a claim unique to Scripture. Several other pieces of this story can be checked against the physical record. Hezekiah's tunnel is one of them. 2 Kings 20 and 2 Chronicles 32 both describe Hezekiah preparing for the Assyrian siege by cutting off the water supply outside the city and channeling it through an underground tunnel into Jerusalem itself, denying any besieging army easy access to water while securing it for the city's population. That tunnel exists. It still runs beneath the city of David in Jerusalem today, cut through solid bedrock for over 500 meters, and inside it, in 1880, an inscription was discovered. The Siloam inscription, describing, in ancient Hebrew, the moment the two teams of tunnelers, digging from opposite ends, heard each other's picks through the rock and met in the middle. The tunnel and the inscription are not biblical claims awaiting confirmation. They are physical, datable, extant. They confirm that Jerusalem underwent exactly the kind of siege preparation the biblical account describes at approximately the correct period. Fortification remains from this era have also been identified in Jerusalem, consistent with a city preparing for a major siege. So to state the boundary plainly, the siege itself, Sennacherib's campaign, the fall of Lachish, Hezekiah's water preparations, and the eventual assassination of Sennacherib, these sit on the confirmed side of the line, supported by material evidence independent of the biblical text. The angel, the precise number, and the exact mechanism of the army's destruction sit entirely within the biblical account itself, with no independent inscription or excavation confirming them directly. Because the Assyrian record does not describe how the campaign ended, historians outside the biblical text have proposed several natural explanations, none of which can be verified directly, and none of which command full consensus. One hypothesis is sudden epidemic disease sweeping through a massive, densely packed military camp, a known vulnerability of ancient armies in general, where outbreaks of illnesses such as dysentery or other infectious disease could kill far more soldiers than combat itself. Another points to contaminated water or food supply, particularly relevant given that a besieging army camped for an extended period outside a city would have been dependent on local water sources, which could be compromised. A third hypothesis involves logistical collapse. A massive army sustaining a prolonged siege, far from its own supply lines, potentially facing a rapid and demoralizing breakdown that later tradition remembered as a single catastrophic night. One historical detail is frequently brought into this discussion. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries later, recorded a story about a different Assyrian king, campaigning in Egypt, whose army was overrun in a single night by field mice that gnawed through their bowstrings and shield straps, leaving them unable to fight. It is important to be precise here. Herodotus's account describes a different campaign, a different king, and does not claim to describe the siege of Jerusalem at all. Some scholars have noted the story as a possible echo of a similar sudden military disaster involving Assyrian forces in the same general era, perhaps evidence that sudden, unexplained catastrophes befalling Assyrian armies were remembered in more than one tradition. But this remains a comparison, not a match. There is no scholarly consensus connecting the two accounts, and Herodotus's story should not be read as independent confirmation of the biblical narrative. None of these hypotheses, disease, contamination, logistics, appear in any ancient source describing this specific campaign. They are modern historical reconstructions offered because the biblical text describes an outcome without a mechanism acceptable to purely naturalistic historical method, and because the Assyrian record is silent on the matter entirely. They are worth stating honestly as hypotheses. They should not be presented and are not presented here as established fact. Whatever occurred in that camp, the meaning assigned to it within the biblical narrative itself is unambiguous. The account positions this moment as a direct answer to the Rabshakeh's challenge, his claim that no God had ever saved a nation from Assyria, and that YHWH would be no different. The narrative structure of 2 Kings deliberately sets up that boast, and then answers it with the one outcome the boast excluded. For the kingdom of Judah, a small vassal state that had just watched 46 of its cities fall and had every reason to expect its capital to be next. This event, however it is explained, became a foundational memory. It shaped the theological identity of a nation that had, by every conventional military logic, no reason to expect to survive the 8th century BC intact. Here is what this investigation can state with confidence. Sennacherib existed. His siege of Judah is confirmed by his own inscriptions. The fall of Lachish is confirmed by Assyrian relief carvings and by archaeological excavation. Hezekiah's tunnel exists, cut through bedrock beneath Jerusalem, with an inscription still describing its construction. Sennacherib's own record confirms he besieged Jerusalem, and confirms by conspicuous omission that he never captured it. His assassination by his own son is referenced outside the biblical account. What cannot be independently confirmed is the mechanism. Whether 185,000 men died from plague, from a sudden and catastrophic breakdown of the world's most feared army, or from an act the text attributes directly to the angel of the Lord. The physical record does not adjudicate that question. It only confirms that whatever happened, it happened decisively enough that an empire built on boasting about conquest went home without one. Was it a miracle beyond history's ability to explain, or a historical catastrophe remembered, centuries later, through the lens of divine intervention? The stones beneath Jerusalem confirm the siege happened. They do not tell us what walked through that camp in the dark.